two of the best things I ever did as an AD. One was started a student athletic advisory council. I mean, I'm old coach at heart, and I was missing that, student athlete interaction. So for me, that was my time to coach our kids beyond the X's and O's. Not only get, like Tyler, as you said, get their feedback, but also now, what are we going to do together to make this culture amazing?
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode holds a master's degree in educational leadership and a master's degree in sports management, and is certified by the National Interscholastic Athletic Association as a certified master athletic administrator. He's been recognized by the National High School Athletic Coaches Association as a National Athletic Director of the Year finalist, and was recognized by the National Interscholastic Administrators Association with the Bruce Whitehead Distinguished Service Award. He's a leader in the sports industry, has presented to athletic administrators across the country, and his ideas on athletic leadership have been published in numerous professional journals. That was a lot of syllables. Please welcome to the Elevate podcast, my friend, Scott Garvis. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. I know we had connected while you're out here working, speaking at the Colorado High School Coaches Association. And I was like, man, I think Coach Farley at UNI is one of the only few Iowa guests I've had. So I'm excited to have someone from my home state I grew up in on. And I guess for our audience to share a little bit more about yourself, kind of what led you into the athletic director world, and then the consulting and speaking that you do, helping all those across the country.
Yeah, obviously, Tyler, my high school coaches were so instrumental in my growth as a young person, and always had loved athletics and sports as a high school athlete and in college. And since my coaches had such a huge impact on me, if I feel like if I can give back just a little bit of what I got from them, I'd be doing some good in the world. And I know that sometimes we look on social media and we're like, wow, this world is really screwed up. But hopefully, in our roles as athletic directors, coaches, we can spread some of that positivity and have a great outlook. I mean, there's so many awesome kids that, as an athletic director, a coach, that I've gotten to work with. And I see the great things they do in high school, and I see the goodness in them and the positive energy that they're going to bring to this world. And I get super excited about our future, because I see so many awesome kids that are going out. And I would tell you, probably now more than ever, some of these kids that are willing to go out there and get after it are going to be so successful. And I get excited for those kids, and I see that greatness in them, and we want to pull it out as coaches, as ADs. We want to pull that greatness out of those kids, make them aspire to things that they might not even have thought themselves that they could attain and be. So it's an awesome profession. I don't know that there's a more rewarding profession. I'm sure there is, but for me, it's awesome to see kids go out. And I tell ADs and coaches all the time, when it's 15, 20 years later, when those kids come back and tell you how much of an impact you had on their lives, that makes you feel good. And you don't always get that right away. I mean, it's delayed. Right. It's delayed gratification. It's not, you don't get the gratification like this,
Right.
It's very delayed.
I've had many friends tell me that, even with their own kids, it is that way sometimes, right? With their,
definitely with your own kids.
I know I have a very different love and appreciation for my parents now than I did as a teenager, when my ego was running wild. One of those key things, and obviously, man, just hearing you talk about, one of my rewards is getting to connect with people like you and hear that passion that people just got to hear you rip. And One of those things as an AD is you kind of build a culture that's kind of, right those tentacles below the athletic director is those hiring those coaches that are going to impact those kids. What are some things from your experience and that you've learned from others that you really to keep an eye out for when you want to find some great coaches that are going to bring out those things you just spoke about?
I mean, I think the big thing is knowing who you are, what are your core values, what's your mission and your vision. I had a great mentor when I first started at a really small high school up in Northeast Iowa. He told me, hire or fire them before you hire them.
Mm,
And I didn't really know what that meant at the time. And now that I've been in this for 25 plus years, it is so imperative to know what you're looking for and to align your interview process to make sure that it aligns with your mission, your vision, your core values, to align your mission, vision, core values, your interview process, how you evaluate coaches, and then providing them professional development is obviously all those things need to be one. And I would say that one thing that I really love to do in my interview process is to find that right person. Is I went number one, the X's and O's are important,
for sure.
and winning is important, but I think it's secondary to having that culture, Tyler, that you talked about. What kind of culture do you want to develop? So one of the things we ask our coaching candidates when we come in to interview, we give them, here are the things that we feel are important. I want you to present to us how you're going to integrate and instill these
Mm,
characters, these developments
mm,
within your program to make sure it fits with our mission, vision, core values.
love it.
So that's number one. Then we do follow up questions. I also have our student athletes submit questions to me. I go through and combine them,
Mm,
and then
mm,
I have a session with our student athletes.
mm,
Now, and I have parents involved. I try to, have our community and stakeholders involved with that. I always tell them, and I'm very clear about this. I go, hey, I want your input. I want you to tell me what you think. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a decision that we make that's going to be best for our program. Maybe not best for your, individual kid or you as an individual parent, but the best is going to be for our program.
yeah.
And it might be it's the right fit, not necessarily. I had an instance where I had a baseball position open. I had like 12 like amazing candidates, which today just like you don't get that. You don't get that 12.
A
And
blessing, yeah.
yeah, I mean, we had, dudes that were like state, multiple state champions, won coach of the year multiple times, and all these great things. But at the end of the day, it was finding the person that was going to fit best with our program right then and there.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do unless you have that those core values established and you really are intentional about integrating that into your interview process and making sure that you're finding the right person, making
Yeah.
the phone calls beyond the references that they list,
Mhm.
doing your homework. So many things that I feel like as an AD, one of the most important things you're going to do is hire great people.
Yeah.
You could probably you might be able to screw up a bus once in a while or miss official, but man, hire good people. And that is so important. And it's getting tougher and tougher because being a coach, Tyler, as you know, it's not easy.
No,
It's
no, no.
you're going to be loved by 50% and hated by 50% of people in your
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. And I think, that's kind of you talked about, which I love is bringing in some of that student athlete voice.
Yeah.
What are the kids actually looking for in a coach? And I think, and then it's so important um, to also, I think, in the academic side of school, whether you're the math department or science department, there are these things of like, here's what you do need to do and accomplish. How are you going to do that in your classroom with chemistry, right? Whatever that curriculum kind of the building blocks are. And so I love how you can, how are you going to teach these things that we want through
Yeah.
athletics? And I think that just creates an alignment in your athletic program from the start and from the hire instead of hiring them and then trying to get them to fit then. And so that voice I wanted to come back to. What are some other creative ways that you've seen schools, ADs, and bring in the student voice? Um,
Mhm.
not just to give their opinions, but to also hopefully create action and move towards the things that those kids want to do.
I tell athletic directors and coaches all the time, two of the best things I ever did as an AD. One was started a student athletic advisory council. I mean, I'm old coach at heart, and I was missing that, student athlete interaction. So for me, that was my time to coach our kids beyond the X's and O's. Not only get, like Tyler, as you said, get their feedback, but also now, what are we going to do together to make this culture amazing?
Right.
And to share that. And again, everybody's got to be on the same page. So we got to share that those same things we share with our coaches, we got to share with our student athletes.
Yep.
How do we bring? I just actually gave a presentation to some ADs out in New York, and I talk about the onboarding process. We talk about all the time in the business world, how are we going to onboard our new people?
Right.
Well, we got to do the same thing with our student athletes and our coaches. Here's
Exactly.
who we are. Here's who we're about. How are you going to fit into this culture? How can you make this culture better? And I think that Student Athletic Advisory Council, not only was it awesome for me to get the student perspective and to listen to the things our students were having to say, but how can I now get my student athletes and coaches on the same page?
Yeah.
So we developed a coaches and captains conference where we had our students and coaches come together, and we talked about establishing that mission, those core values. When I come to your practice, what is it going to look like? And so if you have three core values, I'm going to come to your practice. I want to see those three things at your practices every time I come in and watch a practice. And so we give opportunities for our kids and our coaches to facilitate and to work together, to collaborate on what that's going to look like. And I know, you know, those are tough to find, those opportunities.
Yeah.
But it was so important in developing relationships with kids, our coaches, having that time outside of the X's and O's and the strategy to get to know each other, develop that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
forge some trust, some follow through and what we were going to be about. I think that made a huge difference in our culture,
Yeah.
not only with student athletes and coaches, but just with our coaches as a community too.
Yeah.
Like getting our coaches together and doing that professional development was such a huge piece of that culture. And again, trust is only built through time.
Yeah.
It's only built through making the connection and having that ability. And if we are not intentional as athletic leaders to bring that to our student athletes and coaches, we're missing a huge part of what this is all about.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get locked into just managing your athletic department. It's so easy because there are 900 million things coming at you as an athletic director. I tell people all the time, it's like being a head coach all year long.
Mm-hmm.
You got games almost every night of the week,
Pretty,
that you're getting ready for.
pretty
So
much.
it's just such that student component, giving them the voice, providing them the opportunity to feel like they're a part of that culture. They're not just like bystanders in this. We
Right.
do it. I say to our kids all the time, we do this for you.
Yeah.
This is for you. These programs are for you. What can we do to make this a better experience for you? And our kids are amazing. They've come up with, we've done tons of community service projects through that Student Athletic Advisory Council. Tons of great ideas have come from our student athletes on how we can improve our culture. And having the ability for our coaches and kids to be in the same room and have those conversations. I mean, I get
Well,
chills just thinking about it because it's such a neat process to see.
sure. And I think it's, my experience too around college athletics is that every college has these, right? These student
Yeah,
athletic, it's standard. It's a standard practice, and some are better than others. But eh, I think you just mentioned so many cool things there, these cool projects, these ideas. And I think that's where sometimes, we also hear coaches and adults, sometimes kids aren't accountable. It's like, to what? Like, give them the ownership that they're accountable. Then they'll be, give them some ownership in it. And then they'll maybe show you a little bit more of what you're looking for. And, so many good things can come out of that. And I even know, just being on our football team, one in Northern Iowa, the group that
yeah,
we had, part of, was instrumental to learn from those older guys. And it was a lot easier to step into a captain and leader's role 2 years later because of them, coaches had changed a little bit, but the guys, the mentors were the kids. And so you mentioned trust because that's I think so important. I heard a recent study that they did with adolescents that said it'll take a kid about 5 to 6 weeks to gain trust with a new adult.
Yep.
And in a youth sports context or season context, that's the it's short, and so if you got a new coach, a new kid, it really, to help coaches, like, to build, the faster you can build trust in those things you talked about with other kids, the faster I think we can start to accomplish that. What are some things from your experience that are maybe or examples that stick out of great ways that coaches can begin that process to build trust when they've got a new team and some new kids?
I think the biggest thing, and I just said it's just spending time with them outside of practice.
Mm.
So, I had a basketball coach who did an amazing job of spending time with kids and bringing them together. And he was probably the toughest coach I ever had on kids and held them accountable. But they knew what they were held accountable to. And my son played for this coach, and his junior year was like, I don't want to play anymore.
Mm.
I'm like, what? He goes, it's just too hard. Coach is on me all the time. And I'm like, well, then you need to have a conversation with your coach. And he went and sat down and talked to them because he was like, well, I'm just going to text him. I'm like, no, that's not how we're going to do this. If you really truly feel that way, you need to sit down and have a conversation. Now, he ended up having a good conversation with coach, and he played that year. And it was so amazing. In the middle of the year, I just asked him, I said, Grant, are you happy that you stayed out? And he goes, yes. It took me some time to figure out that coach just wanted the best for me. And he was pushing me because he knew I could be better.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, that time is so important. So the only thing I would say on that is, as a varsity coach, make sure you're spending time with your JV, your freshmen. Make sure that you're going down and watching your youth programs. The more that time that you spend, and I'm not saying you got to, like, completely, be, everything needs to be about your sport, but man, go watch. If you're a football coach, go watch some youth football on a Saturday morning for 15 minutes. Bring your family with you. There's so many things that you can do that people feel your presence and so excited that you're there and a part of it. And if you can develop those relationships in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, man, just think how much further ahead you're going to be on establishing that relationship. Yeah. And that's and I would say that too, Tyler, is like, it's sometimes that's tough in a larger community.
For sure.
Maybe then even as a smaller community, we both grew up in Iowa, and I knew the head football coach at the high school when I was a little kid,
Yeah.
So I grew up thinking, like, that's going to be my coach when I get to high school. Yeah. And I know in today's society, that's not always happening. So that time that you spend is so important as a coach. I've had coaches, they do one-on-one meetings with their student athletes. They're having student athletic advisory councils of their own.
Yeah.
They're bringing in they're having sessions with their kids on leadership. One thing that I think that was really impactful too is that if you wanted to be a captain, you had to go through a training process with us.
Love it.
I thought that was such a great idea and I heard a speaker say this, and it stuck with me, and it's so important. I go, and Tyler, you just touched on a little bit. We need to do a better job of telling kids what we need for them to be leaders within our programs. And again, that goes, that onboarding, telling the kids who we are, what we're about. Here's our core values. Here's what we want you to be about. And then teaching them, like, all right, you're going to run into some situations as a leader within your team that are going to be tough.
Yeah. And
we got to walk through what that looks like for them. And that's one of the things, again, like, why I love that Student Athletic Advisory Council. Those leaders are coming in like, hey, we got some kids on our teams that are probably not doing the right things on the weekends. How do I deal with that? How do I have that discussion? How do I go in and have a conversation with my coach about, like, hey, coach, we feel like you're really negative in practice the last few weeks. There's a way to do that as a leader and to have a good, solid discussion with the coach without being accusatory or coming in. Those are all things I feel like we need to do within our athletic departments to teach our kids how to deal with that. And it's hard. Those are all tough discussions. They're
Yeah.
tough, but I think if you had those on the front end, when you do run into an issue, it makes it a lot easier.
And I think you talked about it with your own son, that like encouraging, empowering conversations.
Yeah.
And I think, having, led workshops with sports parents too, and, the old snowplow, helicopter, whatever, different,
Lawnmower,
yeah,
whatever
whatever,
analogy you want to use.
whichever powered vehicle, they're representing today.
Yeah.
But I think, we know that term, we see it out there in our schools and things, and as do administrators. But I think creating empowering conversations, whether it's just to ask about playing time or something, that in the grand scheme of life, it is not that big of a deal. It's been amazing to see parents change the look on their face when they realize, how important it is for their kids to learn how to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about mental health and mental well-being, and I'll ask them before, how many of you have a concern about your kids? A lot of the hands go up, and then kind of make that connection that like that the snow plowing behavior is undermining it day by day, and
Yep.
that one of the most important things is that day someone's kid in this room is going to need to ask for help. And I hope every kid has an experience of making that a normalcy instead of a scary thing to do. And I think that's, we talked about trust, but talk a little bit about more just how we can empower kids a little bit to talk and ask and be curious and not accusatory, like you mentioned.
Yeah. And again, I think it's having those conversations. I mean, for us, it was like having that student athletic advisory council was awesome. I think we gave our kids the opportunity to have a voice and to have some ownership.
Yeah.
It's just like going into a season. If you go into a season, if you've done no preparation and you just go in and you're like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go play, basketball this season. But I did nothing in the, summer. I did no weightlifting. I just showed up. It is so easy to quit.
Yeah.
It's so easy to give up. I feel like it's the same way with our kids. If we don't give them the tools and that development prior to that, they've done nothing to prepare for that. They're just going to go in and they're going to be like, all right, I'm going to play. I'm not going to have any conversations with coach. If everything goes to hell, it goes to hell. So how do we do that? We talk about, this is your program. How do you want this to go? It's not just on the coach. It's about all of us together, and making it's crazy how kids will look at you when you say that. This is our team. This is your team.
Yeah.
I'm here as a coach to facilitate and to work with you to make this as great of a season as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes you talk about that empowerment. I think when kids feel that they have a say and they can have some ownership. Now, does that mean you act like a knucklehead? No. But we need to teach them what that looks like, because I think in society today, it's just like, no, we're just going to blame everybody else. It's going to be everybody else's fault but mine. We're gonna tell you, look in the mirror and know that we got to own some of this. One of the things that I I love that we did, I still have a lot of them. We talked about our culture. And we just said, what does our culture look like? We want to be committed. We want to have vision. We want to be great leaders. We want to have passion for whatever we do. We're going to be focused. We're going to prepare. We want to be inspiring and caring. But at the next day, that's not going to be enough for us to get to the next level. We got to be innovative, creative. We got to think critically. We got to solve problems, not create them. We got to work together. We got to communicate. As a player, I got to be coachable. As a coach, I have to have the ability to listen. As a leader, I got to be vulnerable. I got to say I'm sorry. Sometimes I need to shut up and just let my athletes tell me what they're feeling. But if we really want to have a winning culture, we got to talk about, we have to be self-motivated. We have to have integrity. We got to persevere through those tough times. We got to have an incredible work ethic. We have to have those interpersonal skills that, our businesses and all these companies say we need soft skills with our student athletes. All right, now let's give them the opportunity to live those out
Yeah.
on their teams.
Yeah.
And we got to sacrifice. We got to be accountable. And at the end of the day, we got to chase excellence, chase greatness every single day in everything that we do. And that doesn't happen every day, but
Right.
that's what we got to aspire to.
No doubt. And I always get a smirk and a smile on my face. Like I think we like soft skills, right? Now we're learning that like they're so important. And whether you look at corporate America and why people stay and leave and hire, in that world or in coaching and sports, um, it comes down to like we've talked about people. And so, one of the questions I want to ask you, more of if you can give us a couple rapid fire ideas. If you were um, uh, maybe been an athletic director listening, you've been an athletic director for 20 years, kind of set in some ways. What would be the two or three things you would challenge a veteran AD to assess within what they're doing with their culture uh, or their programs?
I would just say if you're not doing something, you're just letting that organically just happen. And sometimes that does happen too. Like you hire some great coaches and they're going to create a culture within their team that's going to be
Mhm.
awesome. But then you
Mhm.
might have another one over here that's not. So if you're not, as an AD, if you're not doing something with professional development with your coaches, you don't have something set up with your kids, I would tell you, for me, that was a game changer.
Yeah.
When I, and Tyler, you talked a little bit, I was like, when you're young coach, you've got this, big ego and you think, man, I just know so much about this sport. I'm going to be awesome. But as we get older, we realize like it takes a ton of people and we got to learn a ton. And I still am not there. And I'm
Maybe.
I'm 50 years old and I'm still not
Good,
there.
good.
And I don't know that I'll ever get there. But I think as as an athletic director, we have to be intentional about that leading part and creating and being intentional about creating that culture, finding the right people to fit in our programs, and then working with our kids. I go, those for me, those two things are the most important things I ever did as an AD. And all those things we talk about, building trust, creating culture, all these characteristics that we aspire to, if we're not intentional about it, we're just letting it happen. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But if we go in there with some intention and start setting up, facilitating some discussions with our student athletes, with our coaches, it makes so much difference, especially when bad times come.
Mm.
Like I will tell you more than when adversity strikes and we've got all these relationships developed, we have all these great things happening in our culture. It makes adversity a little bit easier to get through. And I love the Duke women's basketball coach is like, this job never gets easier. Coach, being a coach doesn't get easier. Being an AD doesn't get easier. You just handle hard better because you've gone through that. You've had those conversations. We've prepared our coaches, our student athletes with the tools that they need to fight through that adversity and have those conversations. How important is this for us to have those conversations? If something happens bad, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle it?
Mm.
Are we going to throw our hands up and walk away? Or are we going to like, no, I put too much time and energy and I have spent too much time and built these relationships with these people. I want to be my best, not only just for me, but for the people I've sweat next to for the last 3 or 4 years. That's what I want our kids to feel like. Man, coach has spent time away from his family. He is with us all the time. He spent all this time with the summer with us. He's in the weight room every day. Kids, I mean, as much as every time I go to a school, I always started like, I'm like, hey, we're going to do program assessments. And my coach was like, whoa. We don't want our student athletes. I was like, how else are we going to know what they need? Good, bad, or indifferent. And sometimes it's super small things that we can change that changes a 15, 16-year-old kid's perception. And
Yeah.
we can't do that unless we do those two things.
And I think that I've experienced that a little bit as well. And I think sometimes maybe have you ever got the response from someone in the athletic department or coach that they're just going to give us some smart ass or silly responses. They're not going to take it seriously. You get that, right? And I kind of always question back was like, have you ever done that before? And what was the context when you did? It's usually that they knew they weren't going to be taken seriously. And that's
Yep.
why they responded that way. And I think, that's again, yeah, maybe the first time it's not super informative and but you work through that with them,
Yeah.
conversate a little bit. And then if you make it part of like your process, the feedback's only going to get better, because also when the first time you give someone a form, they're not like, they haven't thought about it until you've given it to them. When they've done it, they know what to keep their eyes and ears open for what's going to look like. And I think,
Reflection.
yeah, and drawing in those eyes and ears to what we want is so critical in our programs. And one of the things I wanted to ask you as well, um, as we close out, you have super, I know my audience hanging out with you on YouTube today, recording this.
Yeah.
I can feel your passion. I love it. It gets me
Yeah.
jazzed up, gets me excited.
Yeah.
Um, what are, what brings you the most joy when it comes to the work that you get to do now?
I mean, at the end of the day, I talked about at the beginning of the show. I had so many people that just poured so much into me. Like, I know everybody, but I would not be here without so many people. Like, there's no way. Like, if you would have told my English teacher in high school, Scott Jarvis wrote a book, she'd call you a liar.
Right.
So I've just been so blessed, and I find joy in just helping others. And makes me feel good when, or even when kids come back and say, "Hey, Mr. Jarvis, thanks for," I had a kid who was kind of a knucklehead in high school, and I stayed on him all the time. And he reached back out to me on Facebook now, and he was like, "Hey, thanks for staying on me." And they talked about, "Hey, like I got a great job, I got a wife, I got kids." And I remember every day you would check in with me like, "Hey, are you doing the right things today? Hey, you got to make sure you're going to class." And he'd be like, "I wanted to throat punch you at the time, but now I look back on that and I'm like, thank you for doing that." And he goes, "You didn't have to do that." And so, but I feel for me, like, again, so many people done so much for me. I feel obligated to go and do that for other people because it's made such a huge, positive impact in my life. Hopefully I can do that for others. And in today's society, I feel like we're all trying to tear each other down. So to be that, light for some people it makes me feel good.
Well, I know you're